Hi there, I'm Wendy McCallum, burnout and alcohol coach and wellness expert, and you're listening to Bite Size Balance, where everyday extraordinary women share their stories, expertise, and wisdom, all in the name of lifting each other up and creating a better life by design. Whether it's wellness, career, relationships, food, alcohol, mindfulness, hormones, or parenting, we talk about all things women's balance. If your life looks great on paper, but it still feels like something's missing, you're in the right place. Welcome to Bite Size Balance.
Hi there. Before we get started with today's guest, just wanted to let everybody know that my next 6-week coach-led rewind program is now open. So registration will close at the end of the second week of May. So if you are listening to this podcast when it comes out, registration is still open for that. And you can grab the details at wendymccallum.com/rewind. I will put that link in the show notes to this podcast. Really quickly, this program only happens 3 times a year in a coach-led fashion. It's incredibly popular. I absolutely love coaching it. I co-coach it with Emily Lynn Paulson, who is the host of Sober Mom Squad. She is also a This Naked Mind certified coach, and we basically share all the responsibilities when it comes to running this program. We have different perspectives, different stories when it comes to our drinking. And I think that makes this a really rich format and really provides all kinds of different perspectives. You don't need to be wanting to quit drinking to join the Rewind program. Really what this is a mindful coach-led break. So we're just giving you an opportunity to experience life without alcohol for 30 days. You can keep it going afterwards. We're going to provide you with the tools that you need to make a decision as to what the right next steps are for you at the end of the 30 days. But there is no outcome that we're holding on to for you, except that we want to help you make alcohol small and irrelevant again. So rewind back to the time when alcohol wasn't running the show. So whether you've already done a bunch of mindful breaks and you just end up, eventually back where you started drinking more than you want to, or you have never done a mindful break before, but you really know you want to do one and you're not sure where to start, it doesn't really matter. This program is for you, and it's so wonderfully flexible and customizable, and the group support is it can't be beat. So again, the 6-week Rewind coach-led program is now open for registration. It includes daily content from us in the form of short video lessons and also weekly co-coached group coaching sessions that you can access by replay if you can't attend live, and a ton of other bonus content, because this Rewind program actually happens in the Sober Mom Squad app, which is Emily's app that she built and designed. And that includes all kinds of other resources for you, including a huge schedule of weekly meetings that you can attend. It's all optional, but there's so much more support in there if you feel like that would really benefit you when it comes to making change around alcohol. And let's face it, this is a tough thing to do. It's hard. Emily and I have both been there. We would love to see you in this program. Again, grab the link in the show notes to this podcast. It's just wendymccallum.com/rewind. And you get all the details there and also the link to register. Okay, without further ado, I hope you enjoy today's podcast. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Bite Size Balance. I'm your host, Wendy McCallum, and I have a really special conversation lined up for you today. I am speaking with Dr. Carol Scott, who is a TEDx speaker and an author. Dr. Scott has degrees in anthropology and child development. She also has a master's in early childhood education and a PhD in developmental psychology. And we're going to talk today about how she helps women find success in their relationships and in business through greater self-awareness and social intelligence. And her approach is really interesting and new, and I think you're going to find it really insightful. So I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I enjoyed having it. Hi, Carol. It's nice to see you. How are you today?
Oh, Wendy, it's so good to be here. I feel great. The sun is shining and it's a beautiful day.
Awesome. You're in a hot place, so I'm jealous.
Well, it's not terribly hot, but it's in the 60s, which is better than being in the 30s.
Yeah, I don't know what we are here because we use Celsius, but we're not, whatever you are, we're not that, I guarantee you. We're colder. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for giving me the time today to talk. I think the conversation that we're going to have is going to be really new and interesting. It was definitely new for me. the framework that you use. And when we had our pre-interview conversation, like our pre-podcast conversation, it was just really enlightening for me. And so I think the women who listen to this podcast are going to find it really interesting, because we haven't talked about this really at all yet on this podcast. So why don't we start? I did a really short intro for you, which I recorded before you got on, but I would love it if you just take some time and just let us know a little bit more about like the work that you do and what it is that you're passionate about.
Sure, I would love to. Thank you. I am a developmental psychologist, which admittedly is an unusual background for a coach like me and the work that I do now. So my career has been in early childhood education and early development of young children, issues related to parenting, to education for the population from birth through the age of 7. And what I found during my education for that work was that I myself had some pretty serious missteps in my own early development. And the intersection of my recovery from trauma as a child and my understanding of child development in general and how young children come to be who the adults that we are now led me to develop this approach that I call the self-aware success strategies. And it's all about recovering and reclaiming relationship success strategies that we were supposed to get between birth and 7. And a lot of us wound up as adults without them.
Right. Okay. So you, at some point, you're doing this work you're working largely in the field of education, and it becomes clear to you through that work that there's some connection between what you're studying there and learning there and your own personal success. Is that fair?
Well, I think it is a bit fair, but also I want to just add that it was really about developing as a professional. It wasn't so much the fact that I was with young children that triggered the change. It was that I sort of literally woke up after my 30th birthday party and said, I'm a PhD student. I'm emerging as a professional in my field, and my personal behavior is not in alignment with that. I just came out of a night of debauchery that would, twist the minds of most of the parents of my preschoolers. So what's up with that? And I went to a counselor to talk about that and wound up in an incest recovery group and in private therapy with a specialist in incest recovery, working on my own childhood baggage.
Okay. Yeah. So this leads us to something that we have not used. I don't know that this term it's probably come up in the podcast. We've had, by the time this airs, we've probably had at least 78 or 79 episodes. So we've had lots of episodes of this podcast, but we've never specifically talked about adverse childhood experiences. And I think we've referred to them, in passing, guests have referred to we call them ACEs or adverse childhood experiences. I want you to, because you're the perfect person to talk about this a little more. Can you just spend a couple of minutes and let people know what those are? Like what kinds of things fall within that category? Because one of the things that I think is really common, it's in terms of the women that I work with, definitely myself, I would throw myself in this category, is there's a natural inclination, I think, for us to minimize our traumas. So to feel like, okay, well, this trauma is just not big enough to fall into the category of trauma. So therefore it can't really have impacted me or be connected to whatever the current thing is that I'm struggling with. And it took me a really long time to realize that there are all different levels of trauma and a series of like smaller, I'm putting that in air quotes, kind of traumas can actually be quite traumatic. And so I'd love it if you'd speak a little bit about this.
Okay, terrific. Well, let's start with the 10 ACEs, because these are research-based experiences that children have that we know have not only an immediate impact on the developing brain if they're under the age of 5, but also long-term lead to health consequences, physical health consequences. And the research originally came out of Kaiser, and they were looking at the social determinants or the common background elements of people with long-term health conditions that were debilitating, like diabetes and cancer and autoimmune diseases. And what they found was that the most common element in the background of all of these people as adults was one of these 10 adverse childhood experiences. There are 3 kinds of abuse, 2 kinds of neglect, and 5 kinds of what they call family dysfunction. So the first 5 are easy: 3 kinds of abuse, physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. The 2 kinds of neglect, emotional and physical neglect. And then the 5, I pulled up my graphic from my website so I wouldn't forget any of the 5 household dysfunctions, because I usually leave one out for some reason. So having an adult in your life who has mental illness, who has a diagnosed schizophrenia or undiagnosed bipolar disorder, things like that. You witness as a child one of your caregivers being treated violently by someone else, usually the other caregiver, the other parent. A crime-focused relative, somebody in your house who is actively engaged in criminal activity, dealing drugs, for example, or you have a family member in prison. One of your parents is in jail, in prison. A caregiver loss, either through divorce or death. And this is the most common one because divorce has become so common. And then finally, a caregiver engaged in overuse of substances, alcohol, drugs, actively abusing some kind of substance. So those 5 family dysfunctions, the 2 kinds of neglect, and the 3 kinds of abuse are the ACEs.
Right.
And something on the order of 61% of the population has at least one, according to the Kaiser research, and about 17% have 4 or more.
Wow.
And the more ACEs you have in your background, the more likely that you are going to stumble in adult relationships. You are going to have drama, difficulty, conflict, issues in your relationships at home, at work, and anywhere else that you make them.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you for that. That's really interesting. I actually didn't know the 10 types. So that's really, and I was about to ask you about addiction. So I'm glad that did fall into the list. I wondered if that was part of the mental illness piece, but yeah, so I can see how more than half the population would have at least one of those. That makes total sense to me. Okay. So those are the adverse childhood experiences, and they're their own list, but I know that you have another set of, what do we call them? I'm going to let you describe it. You have another set of factors that you talk about in relation to childhood development that you think are also really relevant. And I'd love it if you could kind of talk about what those are. Those are your relationship strategies or assets, I think, as you call them, and then maybe connect them back. I'm in my mind trying to connect them back to these adverse childhood experiences. What's the connection between the two? So that's really 2 questions. So maybe start with your list, tell us what they are, and then if you can connect them back, that would be great.
Okay, super. Yeah, so I wanted to say, that set of intensive adverse experiences you can think of it as the center of a circle, and then around that is a bigger set of experiences that children might have that just aren't helpful to their development.
Right. I was going to ask you that, actually. I was thinking that. I was wondering, what if you just have a parent who's not great, you know? So they're not present. So it's not, maybe doesn't fall into that category of neglect, but at the same time, they're not fostering you in the way that you might have been fostered by a different parent.
Right. And those tie really nicely to these 7 self-aware success strategies and how we wind up with missteps in those. So the first thing to know is that when a human being is born, it doesn't have a fully developed brain. As a matter of fact, its brain is basically a skull full of loose neurons, 100 billion neurons that aren't connected to each other at all, really. We have the neurons connected for our sensory input. So our eyes are connected to the part of the brain that sees and interprets visual data, ears connected, skin connected. Other than that, every other neural connection in your brain was created after you were born based on sensory input. And so where do you get most of your sensory input? From the people who take care of you. And so it begins with, as an infant, when you're very first born, we are the most dependent species on the planet at birth. Even little marsupial possums can crawl from where they get born up into the pouch and start suckling. We can't even do that. And so we need people to take care of us and meet our needs. And we have a lot of basic survival needs. We need to be fed, we need to be kept warm, we need to be kept dry, protected from harm. And depending on how good our caregivers were at that, we either learned the basic sense of, I can trust that the world is there for me when I need something, or we learn, nobody has my back, I'm on my own.
Right.
And so the first success strategy is to trust people to meet your needs. And we tend to think of, as adults, we think of trust as something that's either on or off. I trust that person. I don't trust that person. But the fact is, what we really do is trust them to meet specific needs that we have. And so the self-awareness that I offer is about figuring out what you need and looking at who's meeting the need or how you can get the need met by somebody.
Right.
So that's the first one.
And the first, so just as you go forward, is it also the case that these strategies that we develop or these assets that we gain are directly connected to a specific developmental stage or age? Like, is the trust thing happening, is the first one that we develop?
Exactly. And it really gets locked in about the first 6 months.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah.
And it's part of our evolution from a being who thinks that they're really connected to everything. So, you've been inside somebody else for 9 months, and then you're born, and you would think that then that you're a separate being. But it takes about several months, 3 or 4 months, to start figuring out that, oh, I'm over here and I need stuff. And when I do, somebody comes. There's a somebody else. That's not even part of our understanding at first. So within the first few months, you figure out there's a somebody else. And by about 6 months, you know whether they come or they don't come. I lie in the dark crying forever and nobody comes to feed me.
Right.
And that happens in families, certainly where there are ACEs, where there's somebody who's intoxicated or depressed. Really serious postpartum depression can fall into that category of mental illness because the mom just can't even respond. So yes, very early, the first 6 months. And then we start moving into the period where we have agency. You get to sit up on your own. You get to start moving. You get to start reaching for things and grabbing a hold of them. Your grasp function comes in. And so we start experiencing the world in a broader way at about 6 months. And then a few months later, we get mobile. We start scooching around or we start crawling. And then a few months after that, we pull ourselves up on the furniture and we start walking. Once we have that kind of agency, then we're starting to express who we are. And so the next success strategy that we bring to the world is our independence. It's our unique self. And so we're trying to tell everybody, not just, this is what I need a bottle, but I want that. I want that shiny gum wrapper on the carpet and I want to put it in my mouth. I feel angry. I feel happy. Babies start laughing and they start, getting kind of enraged. They start looking like they want things and are mad that they can't have them. And they start trying to express what they think, how they understand the world. And they don't have language yet. They're just starting by 2 to be able to put elementary 2-3 word sentences together. So they're babbling to us. I have all this stuff going on in their mind and they're explaining it to us. Okay. So the independence that we bring as a strategy needs to be responded to with attention and at least an attempt to understand what we want, rather than just dismissing all of it as that's an incompetent human. By the time we're 9 months to 12 months old, we're extremely competent individuals. And we have a lot going on that we want to do, think about, talk about. And when people treat us like we're still just like a bag of potatoes to carry around and nobody's really listening to us or showing up in that moment of, I see you. And that's the adult caretaker response that locks in the sense of, I know who I am. I know what I think. I know what I want, and other people see me. Cool.
Okay. Yeah. So this this makes a lot of sense to me. So originally, when you started talking about this, I was thinking, well, wouldn't everybody have this asset? Because we all have to learn how to be independent. We all learn how to walk. We all learn how to whatever. But the thing that might compromise this asset for us is really all about how people respond to us in terms of our independence. Yeah. Okay. That makes perfect sense.
And in a lot of Western culture families, the response to a toddler is typically, no, you can't have that thing you want. No, I don't think what you think is right. I'm not listening to you. And your feelings are all wrong. You're not allowed to be angry. You're not allowed to be sad. They like happy babies in Western culture. We're kind of a happiness focused culture, especially at that age. And so over and over again, the dynamic is, this is what I think. I don't care. This is how I feel. That's the wrong feeling. This is what I want. You can't have that.
Right.
And so what we learn to do is adopt ways of being, ways of thinking, ways of feeling. We suppress our feelings and adopt the feelings that other people tell us are okay. We adopt a role, a mask, to be the person they will keep loving and will keep taking care of. And so most of us come through that toddler period of independence without any independence. We no longer know what we really want, think, and feel. We've taken on the world's opinion about what we should talk about, think about, feel about, and want.
Very interesting. This feels relevant to me somehow, but
Yes.
we'll save that for our own therapy session someday.
Great. Love to have you as a coaching client, Wendy. That would be awesome. All right. So then we move on. We get to be 3.
Yeah.
And as we move toward that 3-year-old stage, what happens is it's like, I think of infants and toddlers as being very self-focused. They're down there looking at their body, trying to figure out the mechanics and how everything works. What do I think? What do I want? And then all of a sudden, it's like, you could almost see it happen one day. They lift their head and look around and go, oh my gosh, look at the world. And they get really creative and fun and imaginative. This is when their creative play and imaginative play just blossoms.
Mm-hmm.
And now they can talk. And so they're putting whole sentences together to tell you all these fantastical ideas that they have. And some of the common ones that we hear from all little children are things like the moon is following us when we ride in the car.
Right.
So they believe that everything is sort of magical and mystical because they don't have any logic yet. That's not going to come on board for another 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so everything they see and experience, they have to try to explain to themselves, and they have a pretty magical view of the world. And so this is the period where the success strategy is what I call faith, the ability to believe in literally anything. And this is where we learn how to believe in our possibility, to believe in our big dreams that we develop as adults, to come up with the idea of, I want to start a business or I want to start a podcast, and to believe in ourselves. And what happens for a lot of little kids is they talk about this fantastical view of the world. They talk about the big dreams they have. Lots of little kids will say they want to grow up to be the other gender. Little boys will say, I'm going to grow up and be a mommy, or little girls will say, I'm going to grow up to be a daddy, because they don't understand how all of that works yet. It's not scientific for them. And so what they hear over and over again is, no, that's not right. That's silly. Don't be dumb. That can't happen. And so the dreams and the imagination, if somebody doesn't play with them and engage with their creativity and their imagination, they start learning that it's not acceptable. It's silly. It's not valued. And so we grow up to be adults who don't believe in ourselves, can't really have a big dream, tell ourselves, well, they're the people who say, boy, I'd really like to go hiking in the Himalayas, but that'll never happen.
Right. This makes me so sad. I can totally see this in my own coaching practice as you're describing all of this. This makes me sad.
Yeah,
and I can
see my kids too.
Thinking about when my kids were both 3, I think, and we took them to Disney World for the first time, and it was the most magical time because they believed every single thing. Yes. Right?
Yes.
And it was just so all day, it was just this amazement and awe through the entire day. Oh my God, it's Lightning McQueen. Oh my God, it's Belle. Oh my God. So I'm thinking how easy it would be for a parent to inadvertently squash that.
Yes.
So I think
again, you don't have to be a parent who's delivering aces by the handful.
No,
you can just be a parent who doesn't have this success strategy in their own pocket.
Right.
They don't know how to respond.
Exactly. I can totally see how that would be a cycle, like a generational cycle, how that could happen, where that's how you were parented. And it was very much a no nonsense kind of household that you were raised in, and not a lot of imagination and fantasy and room for creativity, and how you would just, again, inadvertently trying to do your best as a parent, end up impacting that one's success strategy, asset. Yeah.
If I don't feel playful, and I don't feel like I can get down on the sandbox with the little kid and engage in their fantasy with them, if I feel silly or awkward doing that, then I'm going to teach them that it's silly and awkward. Yeah, absolutely.
What if somebody else does it with them? So what if you're not so good at it, but there's another person? So what if you're not just, this is just hypothetical, but what if you're not so great at getting down and playing with the cars on the track, but you have, there's another person in the house who's another parent or a caregiver who's really great at that. Can these things, like, does everyone in your life need to support all of these strategies?
No, you just need enough.
Yeah.
Okay. So if my family is very sort of Germanic and square box, but I go to a great preschool where the preschool teachers play with me, I'm good. I'm getting what I need. Yeah. You don't have to have it everywhere. You just have to have enough. So it's about, the consistency of the pattern.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
If I look nowhere, if I look everywhere in my life and nowhere is there somebody playing with me and nowhere is there imagination and fantasy, I give it up.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
Wow, this is fascinating. Okay, so that's number 3.
Yes.
What's
and
number
then
4?
We grow up a little bit more and we get moving on toward 4. And 4-year-olds rein all that in. So from, oh my gosh, look at the world, isn't it amazing? They're like, but what are the rules?
Right.
So 4-year-olds want to be able to understand. They're not logical yet, but they want to start understanding how things work. Mm-hmm. And so I call the 4-year-old success strategy negotiation, because they're really good at it. If you've ever known a 4-year-old, you've been negotiated with. Mm-hmm. And what they're doing is they're trying to get what they want. It's sort of the independent strategy grown up a little bit. So they're trying to get what they want, get people engaged with their activity by understanding what the other person wants. So, we always say in business negotiation, you have to know what is the interest of the person you're negotiating with. What is it that they want? And you have to tailor. So salespeople ask, well, why don't you want to buy this? So that they can tailor their next pitch to get around that or to find your sweet spot. Well, 4-year-olds do that all the time. And so if a mom offers this snack or that snack, the 4-year-old, typically 3-year-old will just pick the thing you said second. So the last thing they can remember. The 4-year-old will ask for something else that incorporates elements maybe from both of the choices that you offer. Mm-hmm. But it creates something new, or they use their knowledge of what they think they understand. So let's say they've learned by now that, look, mom's not going to go shopping to get me the thing I want for a snack. So it has to be in the house. That's like one of her limits. So the agreements and limits we make with each other about how to get along in a group start to shape how the kid gets what they want. And so they're negotiating all the time to get what they want by shooting arrows into targets and trying to get closer and closer to other people's bullseyes, basically. Mm-hmm. If we don't learn how to do that as 4-year-olds, or if we get told, look, kid, it's my way or the highway, pick this or pick that, or don't even pick from 2, here's what you're having.
Right.
Then as adults, we don't really know how to get what we want, if we even know what it is.
Oh, that's so interesting to me. I do feel like I excelled in this area because I have an 18-year-old master negotiator, but I remember doing it very deliberately as a parent. Yeah. I remember, and I used to, I don't know if we talked about this, but I used to coach around food and family food. And I used to do a lot of work with parents who are trying to raise more, what's the word for it? More explorative eaters, I guess, just a little more confident eaters. Yeah. And I always talked about this idea of like never saying this is what you're eating, but instead saying setting these healthy boundaries, like there has to be a vegetable at dinner. Here's the 4 vegetables in the fridge. Which one would you like for dinner tonight? So this is all really fascinating to me because I feel this is probably one where I did do a better job of it. But as you're talking, I'm thinking, I probably fell short in many of these departments with my own kids. So this is really interesting.
Well, and as the parent, as the adult, it's helpful for us to know what are the limits and agreements I have with myself around this, just being conscious of them. Like, I'm not going to the store to shop for this snack. And I know what else we had to eat today. I know what breakfast was, I know what lunch was, and I know what I'm planning for dinner. So what fits in with that in terms of the general nutrition plan for the day? I know what I consider to be healthy. Yeah. I know what I know how to fix. It's like we have a box that from which we're offering choices and making things available to children, either consciously or not. And they're just trying to get inside our box and get, what they want. Yeah. All right. So then when we get to be 5, I call the success strategy from the 5-year-old's vision, because 5-year-olds they're like the little strategic planners of the preschool world. Mm-hmm. They want to get everybody engaged in achieving a goal together. And if you've ever watched a group of 5-year-olds in a group environment, what they do is they spend a lot of time planning how they're going to play.
Right.
And then maybe they get to the playing, but really the satisfaction for them is planning.
Right.
So they'll talk about, let's play Star Wars.
Right.
And you be Luke Skywalker and I'll be Han Solo. And then we're going to go to the third moon of Endor, and then this will happen and that'll happen. And they map it all out.
Yeah.
Because part of the joy is that they're making a plan. They have a goal and they want to get there. And so they're making a plan. But part of the joy for them is getting everybody engaged in the plan and doing it with them. And this is where leadership is really born for the first time.
Okay.
And you can see in a group of 5-year-olds who the great leaders are going to be and who the followers are.
Mm-hmm.
Because when they plan together, there's always one kid who's leading the show, who's saying, this is the way we're going. Mm-hmm.
Just thought of a question. Sorry to interrupt.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible that your ability to reach a subsequent success strategy is impacted by whether or not you actually achieved an earlier strategy? So the creativity, it feels like to me, if you didn't succeed with the creativity and imagination piece at 3, then you would be at a significant, when you were age 3, you'd be at a significant deficit when it comes to trying to create some leadership and vision at the age of 5.
And if you didn't really grasp a hold of that success strategy of independence as a toddler, you don't even know what you want. You don't know what your goal is.
Oh,
yes, absolutely. They build on each other. And I think of the first 3, trust, independence, and faith, as sort of the basic foundation. That's the heart of who you are. And everything else builds on top of that.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Okay. So that too, for me, I think back, I have 2 kids who are only 7 months apart. So I always had kind of 2. I always had 2 at the same age all the time.
Yes.
And all of their friends, of course, were all together. So there was regularly like a big group of 5-year-olds at my house, or a big group of 4-year-olds. So as you're going through these stages, I'm thinking back to when my kids were that age, and I can totally see that playing out for them in terms of how they changed and what they were focused on at different ages. That's so interesting.
Okay, that I just want to add that is where the work as an early childhood educator came in for me in my own recovery, is that as my therapist would work with me on adult relationship skills that I needed, I would be watching children in my preschool classroom developing them. And that was when the light bulb went on.
That's so fascinating. So you were able to say to yourself, or see for yourself, that there were skills that didn't get developed for you when you were younger, and now they're impacting you now. That's so interesting. Okay. So,
all right. So then we move on finally into logic. So around between 5 and 6, around 6 years of age, children start to get basic logic. They develop what we call the physical logic. They start to understand the logic of the physical world. They don't have any abstraction about logic yet, so they can't think about issues like trust or politics or anything, but they can think about the reversibility of an action, that when you do something, you can undo it a lot of times, for example. And that comes in around 6. And so the ability to negotiate as a 4-year-old grows up to become compromise. And kids start to understand that we don't always get everything that we want. And that sometimes, this is also about the age when most kids go from either home into a public school environment or a grown-up school environment, or from an early learning environment where the class sizes are smaller, there's more grown-ups. Now they're in a group of 25, 30 kids with one teacher, whereas they were in a group of maybe 20 kids with 2 or 3 teachers before. So their level of responsibility gets bigger for how to make things work. And it's like they're in community now. And so what they realize is, I'm going to have to give up some of what I want, and I'm going to expect that everybody else will give up some of what they want so that we can all get along here. We can make this work for everybody. And so that I call the success strategy of compromise. And it's a values-led place. And that is what most people miss. The misstep in this is when we think that the way to work at compromise is to get other people to give up so that we can get everything.
Right.
You have to choose, and you have to choose based on what's most important to you. What's your value here?
Right.
What is the value you bring, but also what is your value for getting along? If what I want to do is be kind, and that's a value that I have, then I'm not going to run roughshod over other people and try to get everything I want at their expense.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense.
And then the final success strategy at 7, when you're sort of all grown up at 7, isn't that sad? You got all the relationship skills that you're going to have, you've got wired into your brain now. At 7, what you have to learn is sometimes none of this works and things go wrong. And I call that success strategy acceptance, because we learn that even if you're good and you follow all the rules, sometimes you don't get what you want at all. Yeah. Bad things happen to good people, and good things happen for bad people. Life is not fair.
Yes, I was just going to say that life is not fair. That's the lesson.
And we can't let that be something that tears us down and leaves us incapacitated. We have to, when we fall down, we have to get back up and keep going. When a bad thing happens to us, we have to somehow continue with our lives. We don't just give up.
Yeah.
So that's acceptance. So trust, independence, faith, negotiation, vision, compromise, and acceptance. And if we as adults have those 7 success strategies, none of our relationships are a problem.
Interesting. How many people have all of them? I mean,
I don't know that I've met one.
Yeah, that's my question, because I feel like we're all going to necessarily have, I mean, we may have the base, like some base bits of all of them, but that they're, you know, I don't know very much about this, just what you're telling me, but when I'm thinking, just reflecting on the people that I know and myself, I'm thinking, well, we certainly all are stronger in some areas than others, at the very least, right?
Yes, at the very least. I think all of us can polish these up, sharpen them, even if we have, as you say, sort of bits of them. And some of us literally come into the adult world at 18 to 21 with no clue about any of them. And that was me. I come from a background of 7 of those 10 aces. And so I literally had my capacity for healthy relationships just torn down to nothing, and had to start building it at 30. I've come a long way since then.
And in your situation, I mean, even so what I'm thinking as you say that is, wow, you had 7 of the 10 childhood traumatic experiences in your history. It still took you. You're also like, this is what you do. So you're in psychology, you're focused in on all of this stuff. And you are 30 years old before you realize, oh my God, maybe things aren't going well for me. So I'm curious, for those of us who have maybe less of a, obvious is the wrong word, but strong likelihood of a connection there in terms of how we're functioning in society versus, you know, what we went through as children. How do we notice? Like, how do we get awareness around this? How does someone like me say, oh, wait, hold on, something's not right here. Something's not working. How do we know when we might, some of these strategies might be lacking or compromised for us?
Oh, that's a terrific question. And I think you can sort of start with the big obvious things, the ACEs. So are you overusing drugs and alcohol?
Yeah.
Are you someone who is physically abusive to someone else or emotionally abusive to someone else? Are you someone whose relationships keep falling apart? Like you have high drama with friends, with coworkers, with your partner in life. If every time your family gets together, there's a big explosion and you seem to be at the heart of it, you know, those are really obvious indicators. If you've been through serial romantic relationships that keep falling apart for what looks like the same reason, if you've been married 4 times, 5 times, 6 times, if every time you meet a new friend, something goes wrong in the end, you feel betrayed, you have a pattern in your life of being serially betrayed by people, losing trust in people, you have a pattern in your life of being abused by someone, and in relationship after relationship. Yeah. Those kinds of patterns of unhappiness and dysfunction are a clear indicator that something needs to change.
Right.
And I think then if you sort of go down the next level, it's just like, I'm just not happy with my life.
Right.
I don't know why things aren't working, but I don't feel like I feel like I should be sort of rising in my life and I'm stuck.
Yeah. So common. The thing I hear the most, Carol, from the women that I work with, and I generally the sort of demographic of women that I work with are really pretty busy, very successful women, oftentimes also mothers. And those women are, you know, they'll say like, on paper, I feel like I've got all the things that I wanted for myself, but I'm just not, I'm not happy. And I feel like I should be happier. And I actually feel really guilty saying I'm not happy because I know that objectively I have all these things that other people covet and that I always wanted for myself, but I'm just not satisfied or I'm not happy. That's the most common thing I hear. And that's why I asked you that question, because I don't think some of the women I work with obviously can identify like patterns where things are just off the rails and it doesn't feel, it's so obvious it's not right. But I think for a lot of the women that I work with, it's the opposite of that. It's like, there's just this kind of undercurrent of dissatisfaction and they have no idea why. So that I love what you just said about how it's, it doesn't always have to be this kind of high stakes drama situation. It can just be like a general feeling of something's missing or I'm not happy.
Yes, that's exactly right. And looking back at my own experience, certainly I had a lot of off the rails stuff going on, but there I was. I'm 30 years old. I'm partway through a PhD. I already have my master's degree. Yeah. I have a professional visible position. I'm being, put on boards and people are starting to turn to me for referrals and relationships as a professional. Mm-hmm. And I'm hiding this hot mess of my personal life from everybody, because I feel that if they knew how I behaved when I wasn't in the professional role, they wouldn't want to have anything to do with me. And there's also, I think that's a real big clue. If you feel like people, if they really knew me, would not like me the same way that they do, would not respect me the same way that they do, that's a really good clue that some of this is missing.
That feeling like you're not showing up kind of authentically as who you are, which is also really common, the women that I work with, and definitely how I felt before I left my last career and stopped drinking and did all the work that I've done over the last few years. Is that feeling of like, I'm not actually showing up in an honest way. And this doesn't feel right to me, but maybe not being able to articulate it that clearly. So, okay, that's really fascinating. So now the next question that I have is, given that these things are kind of get hardwired in between the ages of 1 and 7, what if we don't notice them until we're 45, where we start looking into this until we're 45, 50, whatever the demographic of women that are going to be listening to this podcast, anywhere between 35 and probably 60. So what do we do if we notice this much later on in our life? Are we totally out of luck, given that all of this is kind of like cemented in, you said by the age of 7, like, are we in trouble?
Not really. That's my bottom line message is it's never too late to start.
Great. Okay. Tell me more.
Never too late to have a happy childhood. Well, the brain, yes, we get this all wired into our brains. And the truth is 85% of your brain is wired by the time you're 3. And mostly that's around your social and emotional interaction patterns. And then for the next 2 years, you wire up some more stuff that's mostly related to cognitive. It's about math and shapes and numbers and letters and, colors and things like that. You're learning the content of the world, if you will. And by 5, your brain is 95% wired and your personality is pretty established. And then you practice and solidify that personality for the next couple of years. So by the time you're 7, you're who you are. And you take that who you are out into the world, but the brain can be rewired. And my coaching work is to change the pattern of your behavior. And that can reverse engineer back into rewiring the actual neural capacity that you have underneath that pattern of behavior. And there are people who directly intervene in the nervous system and rewire the brain with EFT tapping, with applied neurology tools, with EMDR work with a therapist. And so you can do both, and what I've done is do both, because I feel that with a high ACEs score, you almost have to directly attack, if you will. You have to really deal directly with the brain wiring. And even after all of the behavior change that I did in my life, I just had this baseline of high anxiety all the time. I was constantly anxious about things when there was no reason to be anxious. And so I started using applied neurology work and EFT tapping to work on that. But I think just repatterning your behavior, recognizing the patterns and redeveloping a different pattern. And so what I call my work development do-overs, because we're just going to go back to what you should have gotten with trust. Take a look at what happened, do assessments of how do you trust now, who are you trusting for what, and then start building new patterns for those things.
Okay, that's really fascinating. So we had talked before we hit record about giving some specific examples, and now I'm really curious because I think I understand this a whole lot better.
Good.
We were going to talk about some specific examples of places where the success strategies or lack thereof might actually be impacting women in areas that I feel like are common kind of challenge areas for the people who listen to this podcast. So we were going to talk about burnout specifically and how, if we find ourselves in burnout, which is a place that I certainly found myself, actually been there, I think twice over the course of my lifetime. And it's the area that I coach, almost I exclusively coach around burnout and alcohol. So we were going to try to give an example of how the success strategies in years 1 to 7 might actually be connected to the burnout at the age of, 46 or whatever. So can we talk about, we had two ideas. One example was work-related burnout, and the other one is more like a personal burnout type situation. We'd start with the work burnout. And can you kind of explain how those two things might be tied together for someone? So if there's someone listening to this podcast and they're like, yes, I am 100% burnt out, and I'm very curious as to how my first 7 years might be tied, might be connected to that. Can you explain that?
You bet. And this is highly personal for me because this first example was me all over the place. So if we in a work position, we have authority over a team, and we have a set of stuff that needs to get done, and it's the team that needs to get it done. And we are not able to delegate effectively. And so we wind up doing everything ourselves, or we delegate, but we don't believe that they'll get it done. And so we're micromanaging them, and we're still winding up doing everything ourselves. That was me. I was the original non-delegator micromanager as when I first came into a position where I had a team. And what that is about is the success strategy of trust. It's about being able to trust other people to do stuff, right? And so, do I know what I need from this team member? Am I clear, and am I communicating it clearly? And then, do I trust them to do it, or am I doing it too in some way? Either riding herd on them so closely that they're like, get out of my space, or literally doing it ourselves and then saying, well, you didn't do it, so here it is, I did it.
Do you think in that situation, a lot of the time it's not just that you don't try. I mean, this is a big piece of what I do, this whole not being able to say no, taking everything on, not being able to delegate piece. So do you think a part of it is also, it's not just that you don't trust the person specifically, that you're the delegatee, but that you also don't trust that it will be okay, even if the person doesn't do so I think there's like almost this second level of trust that women struggle with, which is, the sky's not going to fall and we're all going to be okay, even if this thing doesn't turn out the way I want it to turn out exactly, right? So if it's done differently or it doesn't happen or whatever. I don't know if that's part of that same success strategy or.
I think that it is, because if I trust you to do it and I trust that it will come out all right, that's both of those things that are about, am I clear about what I need from you? So it's the clarity about what I need. Do I need you to do this task in the way that gets to this outcome? And what happens between task assignment and outcome can be your creation. If I trust that process, versus I think I'm asking you to do a specific series of things, or I'm really needing something else from you. What I'm needing is your accolades that I'm a good boss.
Right.
What I really need is affirmation from my supervisor that I'm doing a good job. And I'm trying to get that need met through my delegation of tasks. Then everything gets confused. Am I really needing you to do this task, or am I needing you to tell me I'm a good boss?
Right. And so that inability to delegate effectively leads to an overdoing, which leads to the burnout.
Exhaustion, utter exhaustion.
Yeah.
And it's funny, when I first realized this in myself was when I had a team of other adults. But looking back, I actually learned this lesson the first time in my preschool, because I had to trust the children to deal with certain things themselves. And I was originally trying to manage every single interpersonal problem that came up in the classroom and solve them all for the kids. And when I finally flip that to, you know what, this is your interpersonal problem. I'm here to support you as you move through it, but it's your job.
Yes. And I think so many parents listening to this, I'm thinking this as a parent of teenagers now, my kids are 18 and 17, but I went through this same thing and it was part of the burnout. So we're kind of moving into a little bit more of the personal burnout here, but I think that we have a problem in our society in recent decades where we are doing everything for our children and there's not a lot of independence happening, which probably is impacting that success strategy, I would think, in a generational way. But I can see that, for me, I had to be very, very conscious about this. And what I realized when I was in this total overwhelm phase of my life, which happened to coincide with perimenopause, like it does for so many women, from a time kind of chronological perspective, that I had to learn in order to stay alive, basically to preserve myself. I had to learn how to delegate to my teenagers, to my kids. They weren't teenagers then, but let's say they were like 12, 13, like I had to learn to take the risk and just say to them, like, you're responsible for dinner. Let's see how it goes. Or you have to do the laundry. And if you put your, brand new red sweatshirt in with all your white stuff, then you're wearing pink clothes for the next, like that whole idea of delegation, I think also comes in terms of our personal lives and parenting, this idea that we can either do it all and do it all perfectly, or we can let go of some of this and trust that everything's going to be okay. And I think that whole, for me, the learning, like, okay, if I make frozen pizza a couple times a week, the sky's not going to fall. Nobody's going to care. Everything's not going to fall. Or if I let them if I just tell them they have to do their own laundry, they'll learn how to do that when they don't have any clean underwear, because they didn't do their laundry, So, and also obviously like buying into this idea that the whole micromanaging of other people's lives and responsibilities and never delegating actually doesn't serve them because they never learn how to do anything for themselves. But
exactly,
I can see how this delegation piece would also play in from a motherhood perspective for women. So not just delegation at work, but also delegation in the home or with your partner, your kid, whoever.
Completely. Yeah. And of course, we don't want to just throw kids into the deep end of the pool and let them sink or swim. So if you're going to tell a kid, it's time for you to start doing your own laundry, then there's a teaching process. And this is how you do it. And you separate darks from lights and you put this much in of this product and, and then you help them for a little while, practice it until they feel like they're competent, and then they're on their own. Mm-hmm. And that's the way we teach most things.
They don't listen to you and you do it 3 times. And then at some point they do it wrong because they weren't listening. And then they learn that lesson. You actually have to pay attention when you're getting instructions.
Right. Absolutely.
Again, hypothetical, totally hypothetical.
Totally hypothetical. Never happened to me.
Never happened to me.
Yeah. And I think that we as women, we fall easily into the pattern of taking care of everybody else. And so, you have a problem, I'll solve that for you. Mm-hmm. Instead of, you have a problem, tell me about it.
Right.
I'm sorry that's happening for you. What do you think is a good way for you to go?
Right.
Guidance rather than doing for.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. That's good advice too. Okay. So that's an example in the work context of burnout. And we kind of segued that into the personal side of things, but I want to talk about another example that you had given in our pre-recording interview, which was around boundaries and lack of boundaries and how that shows up sometimes.
Yeah. And I actually use a different term because I believe that our boundaries are those edges of who we are that you get at independence. I know what I think. I know what I want. I know how I feel. I know what I need. Mm-hmm. There's only 4 boundaries. I got a physical boundary. I got an emotional boundary. I got a mental boundary. And I have a boundary of desire, longing, dreams, what I want. Okay. Limits are your no's. And this is where a lot of moms get crazy, is they have to say no to stuff. And they have to know what their no's are. They have to KNOW what their NO is.
Right. Yeah.
And so when the 4-year-old is this is about the success strategy of negotiation. And if we have that success strategy for ourselves as adults, then this is no big deal with little kids. But when the little kid is trying to get what she wants from us, they're trying to shoot inside the box of what I call limits and agreements. These are the agreements we have for how we get along in this family unit. I don't go shopping in the middle of the day for your lunch. Mm-hmm. I can say yes to these things and no to those things, and so can you. And so the child is trying to figure out that container of your yeses and nos, your limits and your agreements for how you do these things, how you fix a meal, how you go through the bedtime routine. And we have to be willing to say, that's a no, that's just a hard no. Right. And then live with whatever happens after that. And I think that's the hard part. We want to avoid, and this comes from, this avoidance comes from a sort of faulty, inoperable success strategy of independence, because that's where codependence arises. So I don't want to have to deal with your feelings when I say no. I don't want to deal with your emotional reaction to it. And so I give up and I say yes. And every time we try to get between a child or another adult and their emotional reaction to something, we're being codependent.
Right.
And when you hear someone say, well, I didn't tell you that because I didn't want you to feel angry. I didn't want you to feel hurt. If they would just listen to themselves and stop before they get to the feeling, I didn't tell you that because I didn't want you to feel.
Right.
Well, we all have to have feelings. They're part of life. I get to have my emotional reaction to your no. And you get to face it and say, gee, I'm sorry, that feels so hard.
This is very good, Carol. I feel like
I still say no.
Yeah. So for everyone listening to this podcast who knows that they don't say no enough, which is most of you, this is so interesting to me. This, like, why we're not saying no is because we don't want to deal with the discomfort of someone else's feelings.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
it's uncomfortable to watch somebody be upset, to be hurt, to be sad, to be angry. And particularly women have a hard time facing people being angry. And I think that we cave in a lot when our kids express that they're angry at us. When a kid yells at you, I hate you, which is like the most common thing for a child to say to a parent. It's not like you're the first to hear it. That's a unique moment of, oh, I just can't take it anymore. I can't stand that my kid hates me. Well, they don't really. They're just angry, and those are the words they know for that.
Right.
And it's okay to say, I hear you that you hate me right now, and I still have to say no. I know that you also love me. And when you're ready to talk about how you're feeling, let's do that. And I can maybe give you some more words to help you talk about how you're feeling right now. But we have to stay calm. We have to have the emotional boundary that we get at to separate our feeling state from theirs.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. I have a question for you. Not a prepared question, but it just came up as I was listening to you. So I often say to the women that I work with, especially around drinking, when women are trying to change their patterns with alcohol, often they find themselves in a situation where it feels too uncomfortable to say no. And so they end up, these are the words I use. I always say, you're putting your needs, the needs of someone else above your needs. And you need to start really putting your needs above their needs. But now I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, I don't know if those are the right words, because in that situation, what you're doing is you're choosing to avoid feeling the discomfort of the other person's feelings, and saying that that's actually serving their needs is, I think, wrong, because I think their needs are to learn how to feel their feelings. And so in that situation, maybe I have been saying that, maybe those aren't it's not the right word choice. I think the essence of what I'm saying is probably correct, but maybe I need to rethink that, because I don't know how that serves their needs. And it also doesn't serve your needs. So it serves nobody's needs in that situation. And this is such a good example of setting a limit that actually is a meaningful limit for you. So
what we're doing when we do that is we're just sort of sweeping everything, all the needs, all the feelings, all the thoughts, all of what's happening. We're just sort of sweeping it under the carpet and saying, let's not look at that. And let's just remove it by, I'll just comply.
And if we're talking about this with kids, for the women out there who are thinking, oh yeah, this is me, I say yes too often, and I'm not very good at saying no when I should say no. I will say that from my own work, working with women and my own personal experience, with getting to a point where alcohol wasn't serving me anymore, the saying, oh, now I've lost my train of thought. But what I was thinking about was this whole idea of you've got to be aware of the fact that if your child does not learn how to feel their own feelings, then they won't have confidence in that ability. And that is what leads most of the women that I work with to drink, right? So they don't have confidence in their own ability to feel their feelings, because for so long, they've been protected from that. And we're doing the same. It's like a self-perpetuating cycle, right? Like we're doing that does this make sense what I'm saying? I feel like I'm all over the place, but I was just thinking like, that's another reason to say no to your kids and actually set limits that are meaningful and serve you, is that that will also serve your child going forward, and that they're built for emotion. But if they don't learn that for themselves, that they can handle it and it's not going to break them, then you run the risk of just perpetuating this cycle as they get older. And
it can get so hard to say no. I remember the first time that I practiced this, just saying no to a friend. Mm-hmm. I'm telling you, Wendy, I had tunnel vision. My vision grew dark at the edges. My heart was palpitating. My mouth went dry. All of the nervous system signals that I was under threat were alive and throbbing. And all I was doing was saying, no, I don't want to come over and spend the evening watching television with you.
It's so hard.
Saying no to something so simple was so hard. That was a really good wake-up call for me. Well, how am I going to say no to unwanted sexual advances if I can't say no to a friend about coming over and watching television? How am I going to say no, I'm not going to drink to somebody who's pressuring me to have a drink if I can't say no to something simple?
So great. This is really great parenting advice too, I think, for people with teenagers, like teaching them, and it makes me feel better about that, right? Like teaching them that it's okay to say no, which I've really been working hard on, like in all areas. Like it's okay to say, no, I'm actually not interested in watching that movie with you. It's okay to say that. It might hurt my feelings, but it's okay to say that. It's okay to say I need time to myself, and it's okay to, to take what you need. I love this. I think this is this will be very interesting, I think, to the other moms of teenagers listening to this episode.
And that's why, speaking of teenagers, that's why the teaching of consent, which is really very relevant for teenagers in terms of their sexual activity, begins with that toddler success strategy of independence.
Right.
I know what I want.
Yeah.
But if over and over again what I want is ignored, people touch me all the time in ways that I'm not okay with, and I don't have any control over that. They make me touch other people in ways that I don't want to. They make me hug grandma when I think she's weird. All that stuff happens at that age where we're first learning to define what we want and to get it. Right. And that's when we have to start teaching consent, so that by the time they're 14, they know how to say no.
Yeah.
12 these days.
Such a great point. Okay. I have one more question for you before we get to how people can find you. And the question is, and this is again, not planned, so go with me on this, but I'm curious about this because it seems like we're talking about those adverse childhood experiences and the list of 10. And then we were talking about the success strategies that we develop between the ages of 1 and 7. And it sounded like what you were saying is that having the childhood experiences puts you at a greater risk of having a deficit in one of those strategies, right? Or more of those strategy areas. But then having a deficit in one or more of those strategy areas puts you at a higher risk of actually being an adult who is on the giving end of a adverse childhood experience for a child, right? So it puts you at a deficit as a parent or a caregiver and makes you more likely to be basically perpetuating the cycle with other children. Is that right?
Absolutely true. That's where the intergenerational transmission of trauma and drama, that's the path. We grow up to be people who are going to keep doing the things that were done to us. Absolutely.
So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, oh, I have all these, I know that I'm off track here. I know there are things that I could improve that would make my life better, more meaningful, make me more happy and satisfied, whatever. But you're thinking to yourself, I don't have time for that. I'm too busy taking care of everyone else. This is actually really important. If you want to ask yourself if you want your kid to have the same stuff that you have.
This is where we break the cycle.
Yeah. And if you don't, then there's still hope. According to Dr. Scott, there is. You have neuroplasticity. Your brain is capable of change. And this is, the underpinning of all of the work that I do with my clients. And it's obviously the underpinning of all the work that Carol does with her clients is that it's never too late to teach an old dog new tricks. Well, I don't know about dogs. I don't actually know if dogs have neuroplasticity, but humans do.
We do.
And so there is hope here. So Carol, if women are really curious about all of this, which I know they will because it's fascinating, how can they connect with you?
Well, I'd like to offer a gift to all your listeners. So I have a little book called Becoming Your Sassy Self. It's a little 28-page book at PDF. And if you send me an email carol@lcarolscott.com. I will send it back to you. And please put Wendy's name or the name of the podcast into your subject line so I know where you heard about it. But also, I'd love to invite people I offer a free coaching experience for 90 minutes once a month on the second Sunday that I call the Sunday Salon. Okay. And you can sign up for it on my website and just come and get what I call a sip of SaaS. Come try it for free and see how it works for you.
Awesome.
We get together in a group of up to 10 and do a little 90-minute conversation.
Awesome. So, and so people know why we keep using the word SaaS here, it's because SaaS is the acronym for self-aware success strategies. Exactly. Yeah. So everything we've been talking about, it's not about giving you an attitude. It's about actually setting you up for success. Yeah.
That's right. I think there's a better way to be sassy than the way we've been thinking about it.
Yeah. I love that. Well, thank you so much, Carol. This has been such a fun and interesting conversation. And I know that my listeners have found it equally fascinating.
Thank you, Wendy. It was a great conversation. What a wonderful experience to talk with you.
Have a great day.
You too.
You've been listening to Bite Size Balance with your host, Wendy McCallum. As a burnout and balance coach, I help busy high achievers like you create a more balanced, joyful life. Ready to create a life you don't want to escape from? Download your free Blueprint for Change now. This incredible workbook includes some of my favorite coaching tools and will help you get clear on what you need more and less of in your life. Grab it at www.wendymccallum.com/blueprint. That's www.wendymccallum.com/blueprint.